Turtleford, Saskatchewan, 2003. In a picturesque rural town, a senior citizen lives a life of comfort and security. Fredrick Banks loves his cars and flashing money around the community. He's safe in Turtleford. He's amongst friends and neighbors.
I don't think he had a mean bone in his body.
He didn't write no checks. He had cash.
But a stranger has come to town. A stranger who will change the life of Fredrick Banks and the community of Turtleford, Saskatchewan forever.
There's something not quite right here.
He gave you an uneasy feeling. He definitely did.
Turtleford is a town in the rural municipality of Mervyn number 499 in the Canadian province of Saskatchewan. Located on Highway 26 near the intersection of Highway 3 and Highway 303, it was once considered a hub. The first settlers arrive in 1907, and the next year, a small cluster of buildings spring up. The location becomes known as Turtleford for its proximity to the Turtle River. In 1913, Turtleford gets a post office. And when the railways extend from North Battleford to Turtleford, the town only continues to grow and prosper. Today, Turtleford is a thriving farm and oil community, surrounded by pristine freshwater lakes and golf courses. Turtleford offers a bustling rural downtown with a wide variety of services for a population of just over 500. The town's quaint charm is summed up in Ernie, the mascot, built to commemorate Turtleford's acquisition of town status in 1983. Constructed with welded metal, mesh, and cement, Ernie sits on Highway 26, waiting to welcome visitors. It was in 2003 that Turtleford welcomed a stranger into town. A man unlike anyone that the townsfolk had come across before. He's not someone seeking the town amenities or the natural beauty of rural Saskatchewan. He's looking for something else. He's like a specter, mostly hovering on the fringes. If he's noticed by anyone, it's as a figure in their peripheral view, walking.
He gave you an uneasy feeling. He definitely did.
People wonder who he is, but never for more than a moment. Then they go back to their lives. Nothing much changes in Turtleford, at first. It's a close-knit community, and one member in particular is recognized by all, quirky 89-year-old Fredrick Banks.
Uncle Fred was really outgoing. He liked everybody, and I don't think he had a mean bone in his body. Really happy to see anybody, and if you stood and visited with him for a while, he'd talk to you. Yeah, he was always happy to see people.
Fred lives alone and is an eccentric character. He's fond of cash and normally carries between $4,000 and $6,000 in his wallet, typically in the form of $100 bills. Many of Fred's bills bear his initials, FB, that he's written himself in ink.
I don't think he really believed in banking. He stored his money in different locations within his house and buildings and things, I guess. Fred purchased anything, he went in and paid cash for them. There wasn't much use in trying to change his ways.
We often hear the conversations that people have about living in their small community and how safe it is, and that they don't lock their doors because they feel so safe. But then it always changes when an event takes place, something violent or something shocking, and suddenly they're all locking their doors because that feeling of trust and security has essentially evaporated. The idea that crimes like homicides, violent crimes, don't occur in small towns is essentially a fallacy. The same dynamics at play in large city centers also occur in small towns when we're talking about intimate partner relationships and other types of relationships where these violent outbursts can take place in the blink of an eye.
Just a few weeks earlier, Frederick tells his brother he has over $10,000 in his wallet, which he's stuffed under the seat in his Thunderbird, his other love, beyond large amounts of cash.
His two prized possession cars were his 1966 two-door hardtop Ford Thunderbird and a 2000 Ford Thunderbird.
He loved his cars. He loved to show off his car when I stopped to pick garbage up. Every Friday I'd stop there.
And it was a beautiful car, and he was just excited to share it with everyone.
Anytime you went driving with Fred, he had a pretty heavy foot on the gas pedal, and he liked to show you what his cars would do.
One time he showed me the secret compartment in his wallet that had extremely large bills in it that I'd never seen before.
He didn't write no checks. He had cash. That was the days you could get $1,000 bills, and that's how he paid for his cars.
As Fred Banks and the residents of Turtleford go about their daily business, the mysterious stranger is seen here and there around town. He's spotted as a lone figure who lingers outside of a church on a Sunday. Noticed inside a store, he drifts through with minimal interaction.
I seen him several times around town, and I went to the police. I was a JP at the time. I went to the police and I said, "You better go check that guy out. I said, he looks like he's up to no good."
On August 27th, 2003, Fred is without a care in the world, oblivious to the stranger. But the stranger is not oblivious to him.
I could see where him and Fred would cross paths, like if Fred, was out in his yard, or if Fred was at the post office, or if Fred went for groceries, or any of those things, he would have crossed paths with him, very possibly.
Frederick finds opportunities to show off his wallet of cash along the way. At the same time, the stranger navigates the town anonymously.
I'm sure that this fellow knew that Fred had this money in his wallet.
It's not uncommon for residents of small communities to feel comfortable engaging in behavior they would never dream of in a large center. A sense of familiarity allows them to feel free. Perhaps for Fred Banks, this was just his way of portraying his best self. Fred makes small talk with all the Turtleford residents he meets. After several days of seemingly aimless exploration of Turtleford, this morning, the stranger has something that he plans to do. Eventually, Fred heads home. Fred Banks is last seen at about 10 a.m. and nothing seems out of the ordinary.
He was willing to talk. You didn't visit too long with him because, he didn't like to visit too much, but he'd be out cutting his grass, or I'd go in and change his water meter, or very kind man.
The residents of Turtleford believe they are safe, and no one is more innocent than Fredrick Banks. The stranger in town is stalking Fred like a lone predator, and the predator has finally cornered his prey. Turtleford is a friendly farm and oil community, and despite its small size, residents are used to visitors from all around who are attracted to the waters, the golfing, and the natural beauty of Saskatchewan. It's 2003, and the local town of Turtleford has welcomed a stranger. He goes largely unnoticed, but some who see him say he carries an air of mystery about him. Local man, 89-year-old Fred Banks, doesn't seem to notice the man. Little does Fred know, but with the stranger comes danger and the unthinkable. On Saturday, August 30th, 2003, people notice that Fred Banks isn't making his usual appearances around town. When Fred can't be contacted, family alert the authorities.
Phoned a number of times, no answer. And so they were rather concerned. They kind of thought there's something not quite right here.
The body of Fred Banks is found in his garage at 11:40 a.m.
We'd left, I think, on the Friday previous. We were up in the Narrow Hills Provincial Park at a lake with all of my family except for my sister. So we were all camped up there, and we didn't know that anything was happening until the DNR came to our campsite, and they had a hard time finding us because we like to camp in remote places, and told us that Vicky, my sister, was trying to get hold of us. It was before cell phones, but they had a satellite phone, so then we phoned Vicky, and Vicky told us.
It's one thing to die of natural causes when you're 89 years old, but it's another thing to die by being murdered at 89 years old.
Vicky told us that something had happened to Uncle Fred and that he was dead. She didn't say he was murdered. I didn't hear that anyhow. And she was very upset. But he'd been sick in July of that year, and I didn't know exactly what had happened to him. Like, I was worried maybe that I don't know.
No one is expecting there to be a murder in peaceful Turtleford.
People wanted to know how this happened. How could it happen? Why did it happen? How could anyone do that to him?
It's just spread. People, what's going on? What's going on? Well, Fred was murdered last night. You only have to tell one guy and the whole town knows.
Police inspect the murder scene.
The most important thing is the preservation of evidence, because this tells the story of exactly how Fred Banks has died. And there may be DNA samples, with the way his body has fallen, if there is a weapon that is concealed. There is a lot of things that the professionals of forensic experts and law enforcement need to go through before we can remove the body from a scene.
The Thunderbird is open. Various envelopes and papers are strewn about the front passenger side of the vehicle, and the wallet belonging to Fredrick Banks is found empty.
I didn't have concerns about him being in Turtleford showing people that he had large amounts of money, because everybody knows everybody, right?
The injuries to Frederick's head and face are extensive. A bloody pickaxe-type hammer is found near the body. A lock blade-type knife is under his hip. Police send items from the crime scene for DNA testing. Authorities prepare to make a thorough area canvass to search for possible leads.
I think any time there's a serious crime like a homicide, whether it's in a small town or a large city center, an area canvass is a vital tool that investigators will use to try to obtain some preliminary information as to what happened. So when you're getting into a small town situation, investigators will often rely on that canvass because so many people know what their neighbors are doing. Those in closest proximity to where the event took place are likely to have more information about what happened.
Everybody was just in shock. You know, the RCMP were doing what they had to do, which means we didn't know things.
The police interview a number of people who report they've seen a stranger in Turtleford the days prior to the discovery of Frederick's body. Fred's neighbor reports an incident that only now seems to bear significance. He speaks to a man who called himself Howard, who expresses an interest in the old man's car. Residents now consider the presence of the stranger. A woman that attends a church service across the street from Fred's house has something suspicious to report. On August 24th, she notices a slim man wearing a bunny hug, the Saskatchewan term for a pullover sweater with a hood. The man appears to be destitute. She's concerned about him, and while he doesn't appear to need any assistance, she writes her name and phone number on a piece of paper and encourages him to call her if he needs help. The officer takes down the description of the man in question. Shortly after the murder, a cashier from a Turtleford retail store has interactions with the newcomer as well. On Wednesday, August 27th, he sells a visitor a backpack. He recalls something odd that happens later in the week. The clerk recalls seeing a man who looks like the same person he sold the backpack to discard an old backpack in a garbage bin. The description given is identical to the others. The anecdotes are painting a picture. A teller from the Turtleford Bank has an odd experience on her shift that she shares with police. On Thursday, August 28th, a customer in a bunny hug approaches her wicket and asks her to change his money into smaller denominations.
The teller told him that he had to basically stay in line, and he left at that point.
Police follow the trail. A Turtleford gas station employee reports that on Thursday, August 28th, she sells a one-way bus ticket to North Battleford for departure the following morning. It's verified that the bus that the visitor boards arrives in North Battleford at 11 a.m. on August 29th. Authorities have a good idea of what the suspect looks like and share this information with other jurisdictions in the hunt for a suspect who is on the move. The man who calls himself Howard seems to be getting around. At approximately 11:15 a.m. on August 29th, a bank clerk in North Battleford is approached by a client who gives her a wad of $100 bills, asks her to count out $4,000 and deposit that amount. All the bills bear ink markings. The transaction is captured on a video surveillance tape. On August 29th, a customer named Sangster checks into a room at the Beaver Hotel in North Battleford. A North Battleford resident reports that on a late August afternoon, about 2 p.m., she goes to a North Battleford hotel bar for a drink. She enters the back alley behind the hotel to smoke a cigarette, and there she sees a stranger discard a backpack in a dumpster. She calls out to him not to do that, so he retrieves the backpack and disposes of something from it. Then the man approaches her, hands her the empty backpack, and leaves. The stranger wanders around the hotel that night in a way that frightens the owners. They alert the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
So here we have an RCMP detachment who would share information over the local system, so all RCMP officers within the area would have a knowledge of what occurred and what to look for. And any information with respect to direction of travel would be fanned out accordingly. Having established themselves as the lead investigating agency or detachment, any information received would come back to the investigators, and they would be responsible for sort of coordinating who gets notified next or where to deploy their resources as they feel are necessary.
On September 2nd, 2003, authorities catch up to the stranger, whose name they discover is Howard Sangster.
They didn't have any problem arresting him, and then they come to me and I signed a remand warrant for him.
While the hunt for the suspect is on, forensic testing is conducted on the weapons found at the crime scene. A sample from a particular swab taken from the handle of the pickaxe returns results of mixed origin. It's consistent with having originated from two individuals. The tests conclude that Fred Banks and Howard Sangster are both possible contributors. Back in Turtleford, Fred's death is having a real impact on the residents.
It shook me because Fred's house is just down the block from here. And I understand that he was gone, but I still struggled after a council meeting to go outside to my vehicle, which is parked behind the office, because it's a little bit dark. I knew there was no danger there for me, but it was hard for a long time to do that. And I think as a community, it was difficult for us to comprehend how anyone would hurt such a sweet man.
"80-year-old Fredrick Banks has been tragically murdered in Turtleford, Saskatchewan. Police investigations have followed the drifter across the province with the help of uniquely marked bills belonging to Banks. and eyewitness accounts of people who identify this person as the man who was in Fred's town during the time of his death. Authorities have finally caught up with this man and discover him to be Howard Sangster. And he is no stranger to trouble. Now in custody, authorities learn that Howard Sangster had a notable past. Howard Sangster is arrested and charged with bank robbery in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia in 1995. But Sangster is found not guilty by reason of insanity. Afterwards, he moves into a rooming house. But he perpetrates a violent attack on the owner of the rooming house, stabbing him 17 times. Miraculously, the victim survives. Sangster is committed indefinitely to a psychiatric hospital. But he's released 6 years later when medical professionals decide that Howard is ready to rejoin society. It's 2001. During this time, he lives in Piedmont, Nova Scotia with his mother. He later successfully applies for an absolute discharge, thus cleaning his permanent record. This action prevents authorities from keeping track of him.
The conditional discharge is when someone who's found not guilty by reason of mental disorder is discharged from hospital and allowed to live in the community, but they're subject to conditions set by the review board. So complying with treatment, taking medication as directed, abstaining from drugs and alcohol, and that person is under medical supervision. So an absolute discharge is granted when the review board believes that someone's no longer a threat or a substantial threat to society. So if someone demonstrates stability over a long period of time, that's when they would be granted an absolute discharge. Every year, the Criminal Code Review Board reviews that decision.
It's 2003. Just 1 week after Fredrick Banks was discovered dead in his garage. The police feel confident they've apprehended the right man, but there's always a chance that Sangster could be released if they're unable to prove it was him. Prosecutors need to build an airtight case, so this time, justice will be served. Fred Banks' neighbor recognizes Howard Sangster as the stranger who spoke to him about Fred's car. This identification will be important testimony for placing the suspect in Turtleford. Multiple witnesses help police to build the picture of Howard Sangster's movements before and after the murder. How he exchanges money with Fred's initials on it, purchases at various stores, and multiple bus ticket transactions. A pathologist analyzes the nature of the wounds that appear to have killed Fred Banks, and investigators analyze blood splatters at the scene of the crime.
A blood splatter analysis expert that comes to a scene is able to analyze why the victim's blood may either be on the wall or on the floor or a trail of blood at the scene. They're able to relay the events in a chronological manner so we understand the violence that the individual has gone through.
In addition to blows to the head, expert examination identified 3 wounds to Frederick's neck.
The expert in blood stain and pattern analysis will look at a scene and be able to tell specific details. The force of the object, the angle, the weapon, and even secondary situations where the individual might have received a blunt force trauma from that weapon in one area of the room, but then the body was moved and he died in a different area of the room. These are the specific details that we need to know in order to solve a crime.
With the violent history of Howard Sangster, the multiple witness identifications in Turtleford, and along Sangster's escape route, combined with the forensic evidence, makes the case against Howard Sangster look irrefutable. But Howard Sangster has been held not criminally responsible for his crimes in the past. Sangster is given a psychological assessment.
In Canada, there are two different types of psychological assessments for adult offenders. There's a not criminally responsible assessment and there's a fitness assessment. So not criminally responsible assessment deals with whether or not at the time of the offense, the person had the capacity to be morally culpable for their actions. A fitness assessment, on the other hand, deals with whether that individual understands the trial process. So a finding of not criminally responsible means just that, not criminally responsible. So that's not a conviction or not a finding of guilt in the eyes of the law, because that person, what the court is saying is that they didn't have the mental capacity at the time of the offense to be morally culpable for it. So it's essentially a finding of not guilty.
Will he be fit to stand trial for the murder of Fredrick Banks? Or will he go free? The idyllic prairie heartland of Canada. It's the last place anyone would expect violent murder. But the trial for the Turtleford, Saskatchewan senior Fredrick Banks, found dead at a gory crime scene, begins. Howard Sangster looks like the guilty party. He has a violent past. Although that crime has been expunged from his record for reasons of insanity, he walks away from those charges. It seems likely that if he goes free again, that there will be a significant risk of serious physical harm to the public. Howard Sangster must first pass the psychological assessment to see if he's fit to stand trial for his actions.
So in this case, there's a fitness assessment ordered for Howard Sangster. So what a fitness assessment is set to determine is whether or not the accused is capable of standing trial, as in, do they understand process? So it looks at whether they understand the charges against them and the roles of the participants in the trial. So they understand what their lawyer does, what a judge is supposed to do, what a Crown prosecutor does, and basically why they're there and what's happening. If an accused is deemed unfit to stand trial, it doesn't mean necessarily that they're walking away from the charges, especially if it's serious charges. What happens then? They're often detained in a psychiatric institution until they're deemed fit to stand trial, so until they're properly diagnosed and medicated.
After the assessment, Howard Sangster is deemed fit to stand trial.
I testified at the trial as a character witness. I remember walking into the courtroom and looking at Sangster and thinking, he doesn't even look the same. That was difficult. I mean, to go to court and testify when I've never done that before was difficult. And brought everything back up, right? Everything is there. You think you deal with it, and then it's gone again, right? It's gone, and then it's right back up at you.
Howard Sangster is charged with first-degree murder, which is then reduced to second-degree murder for the murder of Fredrick Banks. The facts are presented to the jury. Fredrick Banks is found dead with extensive injuries to his head and face. His vintage Thunderbird is found unlocked with various papers and envelopes strewn about his garage. His wallet, which is famously stuffed full of thousands of dollars of initial bills, is empty. A bloody pickaxe is found nearby, and a lock blade knife found under his hip. A pathologist testifies that the 3 wounds to Frank Banks's head were caused by a sharp, straight instrument. Banks's death occurs rapidly and is caused by a very, very considerable force applied to the brain, and that the bloody pickaxe could have been the murder weapon. A Royal Canadian Mounted Police bloodstain expert testifies that blows from the pickaxe could account for the kind of bloodstains found at the crime scene. Howard Sangster appears to be or look like a man who was noticed around Turtleford the week before the murder. Multiple witnesses take the stand and the testimonies begin to add up. Howard Sangster is familiar to a number of witnesses, and the descriptions are similar. A man in his 40s with a slim build, who looks like he lives a hard lifestyle, is unkempt, unshaven, and wears a dark-colored, tattered bunny hug. $39 of the bills deposited at the bank and 4 of the bills used to buy the bus pass are studied by an expert document examiner. All but 1 of the bills carry ink markings that prove to be overwriting, or writing applied over existing letters. On all but 9 of the bills, the initials FB are overwritten. Police subsequently find the bag containing Sangster's discarded clothes from his change into fresh clothes in the North Battleford store bathroom. During the course of the investigation, these items and a number of others are sent for DNA testing. A doctor and civilian member of the RCMP give expert testimony and presents her analysis of the case through the DNA samples.
DNA is definitive, so it can turn your neighbor into a suspect because it is the biological information that our body holds that is unique. And the sample obtained from a scene of a crime, when you get a match, it is the key that opens up that lock.
The genes retrieved from the North Battleford landfill match that of Sangster. The chances of that DNA coming from another individual from the Canadian Caucasian population is 1 in 14 trillion. A swab taken from the handle of the pickaxe is of mixed origin, a 2-person mixture. The DNA expert concludes that Fred Banks and Howard Sangster are both possible contributors. She goes on to explain that if the jury imagines the DNA came from other individuals with the identical profile to Banks and Sangster, it is a 1 in 1.6 trillion chance for Banks and the 1 in 1.4 trillion chance for Sangster. In the prosecution's closing address, Fredrick Banks's death, the time of his death, and the key issue, the identity of the killer, are the main elements. The murder is seen by the Crown as a case of robbery gone wrong, and the case against Howard Sangster based on opportunity and motive, Sangster's appearance of being destitute, and Fredrick Banks's flamboyance with his cash. Sangster's movements after the crime connect the dots. Howard Sangster is found guilty by the jury of second-degree murder and sentenced to life without a chance of parole for 10 years. But the defense appeals the conviction and argues that in the prosecution's closing address, they allegedly make improper comments about the DNA evidence that has been introduced, and presents additional evidence to the jury, which results in a miscarriage of justice. The appellant Howard Sangster asks for a new trial.
Every accused person who's convicted of a crime has the right to appeal. In a serious offense, an indictable offense such as homicide, it would go to the Provincial Court of Appeal first, and then depending on how that goes, up to the Supreme Court of Canada. Now, while every accused person who's convicted has the right to appeal, whether or not an appeal is granted is subject to very strict guidelines, both in the criminal code and in the common law. So the accused has to point to either an error of law made by the trial judge, or they can appeal on an error in fact, but it's much, much more difficult because deference is owed to the decision of a trial judge. And it's also very difficult to appeal a decision by a jury. Usually appeals of jury decisions can only be successful if there was some sort of error in the instruction from the judge to the jury.
Is it possible that Howard Sangster may walk free? The Court of Appeal finds that in attempting to explain the complicated testimony of a DNA expert, the prosecutor moved beyond the evidence which had been given and involved himself in a discussion of technical analysis and explanations. The court ends up ruling that the prosecutor's comments did not result in a miscarriage of justice and were tempered by the instructions of the judge. Although the prosecutor went further than he should have, the whole situation is considered, and it is decided that the jury was not improperly influenced by the comments. The appeal is dismissed. Sangster's past victim, who miraculously survives his violent attack, and the unfortunate Fredrick Banks is not so lucky, finally receive a kind of justice, with the public now free from the threat of violence.
When I think about Fred, I think about how much he loved his family and loved his cars, loved being part of the community where he knew lots of people. And I think about that smile and the laugh.
But after the visit from Howard Sangster, the rural town of Turtleford will never look at strangers on their streets in the same way.
Every time you see a stranger come to town, everybody wonders, who's this guy? I mean, in the last few years, we've had all kinds of people moving in and out, and everybody, well, who's this guy? Where's he working? What's he do? And everybody asks the same question. Who's that guy? Oh, well, that's so-and-so. But I don't know half the people work in town anymore.
Howard Sangster leaves behind a legacy of fear. And as their small town expands and grows, the residents of Turtleford grow with it. They bond tighter together as a community, in vigilance and to look out for their own.